Hi, welcome to Regent Park TV. Today we bring you coverage of a media conference addressing Toronto's homelessness crisis and the urgent demands for action. A new report from the Shelter Housing Justice Network and the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union describes the city's approach to homelessness as reckless and murderous social policies that have failed the most vulnerable. Their demands come as Toronto Public Health reports 135 homeless deaths in the first half of 2024, with drug toxicity responsible for over half. At the media conference, moderated by outreach worker Greg Cook, advocates and people with lived experience highlighted the extreme challenges faced by homeless individuals, especially those with disabilities. The groups presented 29 urgent steps for the city to address the housing emergency, including keeping warming centers open 24/7 and increasing rent-geared-to-income housing. We'll also hear from Lynn, who spent 2 years living in Toronto encampments, and Jennifer Jewell, a wheelchair user and TUHU member, who share their experiences and perspectives on what needs to change. Now we bring you the full media conference and exclusive interviews. This is RPTV News.
We recognize the enduring leadership of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Indigenous peoples here in our community, many of whom have led and taught many of us about caring for one another, physically, spiritually, and mentally, through an epidemic of death of houseless people. We are here in Toronto City Hall. The city government, we know that the city government produces dozens of reports and stats on the state of the housing crisis and the fact that the shelters are full. So why are we releasing another report, you might ask? The first is that the city doesn't make adequate policy and funding directives. They are content to leave hundreds, if not thousands of people stuck outside each year. So we've made sure to clearly put dozens of detailed demands in this report. Secondly, the city reports are out of touch with what is actually happening in the shelters, in the survival structures, and in RGI housing in Toronto. We want to bring to your attention 2 examples of this. Just yesterday, Toronto Public Health acknowledged that their data on the deaths of unhoused people was a massive undercount. Previously, Toronto Public Health had reported, for example, that 191 people who were homeless died in 2022. They have recently worked with the provincial coroner and now say the number of homeless deaths in 2022 was 331. This is a massive undercount of 140. Beyond having large undercounts at times, the city fails to center the voices and expertise of unhoused people in their reports. This contributes to the city failing to respond adequately to the severity of the crisis. It is budget season right now, and the city's report acknowledges that billions of dollars are sitting in their capital reserve funds year after year. This money is earmarked for shelters and affordable housing. While people are literally freezing outside in the winter, this money is just sitting there. It is an emergency. They must act. This report, Dignity and Housing for All, demanding an end to the dehumanization of disabled, unhoused people, was directly co-written with people who are unhoused, who have disabilities, people who have important knowledge and experiences of the shelter and supportive housing system, and of the city's response to people living in survival shelters. Today, I'm joined by several members of the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union, also known as TUHU. TUHU is a union built and led by people experiencing homelessness and precarious housing. They bring people experiencing homelessness and precarious housing together to find their collective voice, speak truth to power, and organize to end homelessness. They organize that so people experiencing homelessness can become leaders, not mere participants, in the fight for safe, affordable, accessible, dignified housing for all. The TUHU members here today are leaders. They have worked tirelessly with SHJN to create our Dignity and Housing for All plan, and they are speaking to you today from the hard-earned knowledge and experience of the very oppressions they are here to address. We welcome their leadership and hope that the city will have the wisdom to do the same. Asil is a board member of the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union, and she'll be talking to you today. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Asil. Step in closer, please. I have experienced homelessness off and on for 35 years, and I was diagnosed with MS for 32 years, and fibromyalgia and PTSD for the past 3 years. I executive member of TUHU, I live in shelter currently on the west side of the city. People with disability like myself are often treated as if our needs are extra burden that frustrates and exhausts staff. Instead of being treated with respect, staff are often avoided. To give us one example, a few weeks ago, myself and two other shelter residents peacefully approached a staff person in in the halls. She ran into the room and locked the door, making us feel like animals that were about to attack her. We told her we needed to discuss her with her our issues we were having with heating events in our rooms. We are not violent people, and yet we're made to feel like we are. I was then passed through a series of staff people over the course of a week. Meanwhile, my heat blasting was in my room from old dusty vents, loud vents, creating an extremely uncomfortable sleeping environment. Getting sick and triggering my allergies affected my mental health. I simply wanted to turn the heat down, but there is a sign on the vent that says we will get immediately discharged if we do. Finally, after a whole week of being passed around, and staff person took time with me and assured me that I would not be discharged if I touched the control and did what I needed to do. I can now sleep again in my room. Something that it took 5 minutes to fix caused a week of stress. Stress. Imagine if I was less stable. This interaction could have sent other people with more limited ability to navigate in straight back to the streets. People with disability are neglected in the shelter system. We are treated as if we are too much to handle. Some staff are even afraid of us, and our disability staff reaction to us often escalate the situation, and then the person with the disability is the one made to look like they are the one who is unreasonable, out of line, and if they get triggered and cry or cannot regulate their emotions well. Staff must have training if specific to understand the needs of people with disability. As someone who use a mobility device to walker, I would greatly benefit from their bars in the showers to hang on to and a removable shower head so I could wash myself. Simple tools to help us have more dignity and agency of our lives and our bodies, but these are not often offered, and every last thing is a fight. Sorry. It's exhausting and defeating. There is a culture, a resistance to accommodation which must end. People with disability are here to consult with and help shelter learn and understand what it needs to accommodate us. We are not a burden. We are a set. Our stay in shelter should be brief. We need permanent housing more than anything, but while we are here, listen us. Listen to us. We know what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Asil, for speaking those words. Next, I'd like to invite Lynn Walker up. Lynn is a member of TUHU and has experience of living outside in a tent. Just going to ask Lynn a few questions. Lynn, in this year's budget, the city plans to increase the city's encampment office budget by $1.79 million, which means 14 additional staff. How do you think this will affect people living in survival structures?
I feel that kind of money is just a waste of money, and that money could be used for actually housing people properly. and it's really affects encampments because a lot of it's money is used to take their tents and take everything they own, including wheelchairs, canes, any mobility devices, and it's really hurts to see that happening. Like, I would really get angry with the city workers that do take the tents. Yes, people need to survive, and where would they go?
So you sort of answered this, but I'll ask it again just in case you have any more details. How does the city's approach to people that live in survival structures affect people with disabilities that live outside?
It makes it hard. There's people that are out there that are actually in wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, that may have only one leg or they're paralyzed their arm, and they're trying to move around with manual wheelchairs, and it's hard to see that. It's hard to take that. They're people. They're human beings, and they shouldn't be on the streets. They shouldn't be in shelters. They should have homes. And I know the city's got the money. They're just wasting the money.
So you've talked about what the city shouldn't be doing. Could you tell us a little bit about what they should be doing in response to the housing crisis and so many people outside?
The city should be making sure that disabled people have the help they need. There's people that have mental health issues, including me, and they could be helping those people. But more than anything, people need housed, and people need walkers and wheelchairs and scooters out there. I think the city should be, even if they're used scooters, make sure people have mobility, a way to get around. It's not fair to have to try and spend hours just to move a wheelchair that's you can barely move on. I've actually seen somebody fall onto the road with the wheelchair, and the ambulance having to come. It's not all right. Oh,
Thank you, Lynn.
okay.
I'd like to invite the next speaker up, Salah Sheikh. Salah is a community advocate. He is part of the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union and is also part of the African Canadian Collective. Salah.
Good morning. Toronto has long prided itself on being a city that welcomes all, yet recent policies have failed to uphold that promise. The Office of the Ombudsman report has made it clear denying refugees claimant access to shelter was not just wrong, it was discriminatory and dehumane at its core. This is an accessibility issue. The report exposed systemic failure that ensuring access to critical service when asylum seekers were turned away from shelters. It wasn't just policy failure, it was violation of their fundamental right to access emergency housing and services that exist but cannot be accessed. It's not service at all. Ensuring true accessibility means removing barriers, whether they are physical, biometrics, or rooted in discrimination. Today, we are here calling for full implementation of the report 14 recommendation. No one should be ever turned away from emergency shelters because their immigration status or identity or for any other reasons. This is just not about policy, it's about human dignity, safety, and the value we claim to uphold as a city. We call for transparency, accountability, and immediate action. The city must commit to clear, detailed employment plan with firming timing and commitment. The city must I don't do like reading. So the city must do what they say do. They spend money on reports and meetings, and it takes you 2 weeks in the street to see that this is not happening. What they're saying is not what they should take time to talk to people who have experience, to community advocates, to know what's happening and do that. There is always a gap between what we see in the street what people are suffering from, and what happened in City Hall. So we call the city to listen more to the people who have experience, to people in the ground. And now let's go back to reading. I just wanted to say that. We ask the city to do more and do it better. Having meetings and hours and more staff and more budget to do something that is not related and doesn't have effect on the ground, it's not actually doing it at all. So it's accessibility, like we all, it's not about having ramps. Everyone should have access to every service in the city. How that will happen if we're not invited into the table? If the decision is being made in closed doors without people in that, you cannot having talking about homelessness and not having people who suffer from homelessness in the table. Cannot be talking about accessibility and all the people making decisions are not people with disability. Cannot talking about newcomers and refugees without having people accessing this information or meetings. So we hope this report, someone read it and do something about it. We don't have to be here next year talking about the same things. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up our last speaker, Jennifer Jewell. Jennifer is a queer, disabled woman with lived experience of homelessness who has experienced and witnessed firsthand the ongoing destruction to lives and community that ableism in policy has caused. She's an active member of TUHU and co-chair of the Accessibility Committee. Jennifer, if you could come up.
We have worked very hard on these demands. I am going to read part of the second of 29 demands that holds the most meaning for me. To the City of Toronto, update the City of Toronto's definition to align with definitions of accessibility that support disabled people to live their lives with dignity and self-determination, and adheres to recommended guidelines and existing or expecting legislation. The City of Toronto and the Ontario Buildings Code definition of a wheelchair accessible residence is that it is visitable. It does not require that it be livable or that wheelchair users can function in the space. It does not require that built-in surfaces and storage, such as closets, counters, overhead cabinets, be accessible to disabled tenants, including seniors. I was housed into a building leased to the YWCA in a building that was extensively renovated. Yet there is not a single apartment that is not built to standing height out of 120 units. I have 2 cupboards I can use in the kitchen of 10 because my friends went out with money from their checks and spent several $100s buying the pull-out shelving so that I could. And apparently that is too financially unattainable and complex for the YWCA and the city. So this is what I have to say to the municipality and their claim that they don't have the money. How many wheelchair accessible units could have been created with even a portion of the $424.7 million left unspent in 2024 from the funds that they were given to build housing and to go into the shelter system? How many modifications for disabled residents of city-owned buildings could have been granted after years of being denied? And on a very personal level, how much of the money left unspent in the last 3 years running, or the $11 billion sitting in reserve, could be used for something as simple as permanently fixing the broken elevators at Bond, or ensuring that all the residents have hot water because they don't? And contrary to Olivia Chow's little photo up there in November, it is not housing. It is an enrollable 4-year program that comes with a 20-page contract of conditions and consequences, most of which end in being evicted. So when you, the media, interview the City of Toronto about the budget next week, ask them, please, why don't they designate funds within the housing budget for building the wheelchair accessible apartments so desperately needed across our city. Ask them why their legal definition of an accessible apartment does not require that a disabled person can function within the space. Ask them why, when TUHU asked them how many wheelchair accessible units they owned, they could not give an answer. And please, please ask them why, with all of that money spent, one of us has to die for another one of us to be housed in their version of wheelchair accessible housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'd just like to conclude by saying a few things. Thank you to all the speakers who raised these really important points. I'd just like to summarize the key demands that we're bringing today. We demand that the city center disabled people in TSSS program and service design, ensuring that accessibility is defined to include usability for wheelchair users and people with disabilities in all shelter and supportive housing and subsidized housing units. Conducting an accessibility audit of programs and services with plans for improvement. Earmarking funds from this year's budget to immediately shift warming centers to year-round respites with surge capacity for inclement weather. Ensuring all city-run facilities meet accessible design guidelines and shelter standards that promote safety, well-being, and health. Ensuring that access to safe emergency shelter is never restricted based on immigration status or other facets of identity, and adopting the recommendations of the Office of the Ombudsman report. And then also implementing a moratorium on the clearing of encampments and survival shelters, and divesting from the $10.6 million of additional funds allocated to displacing and policing and harassing residents in this year's budget, and to instead invest that into rent-geared to income housing. Finally, SHJN and TUHU would like to publicly ask to meet with Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow to ensure that these demands are addressed. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Jewell. I am an active member of TUHU, the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union. I was evicted from the house where I'd been living for 20 years when new landlords took over at the beginning of the pandemic, and was homeless for 3.5 years. I spent time in a park, which was the most healing aspect of what I went through. And then the next almost 2 years at a hotel shelter where my rights and the human rights of everyone else there were violated on a daily basis. Every accommodation my doctor ever mailed them, they denied or ignored. They left me behind in a fire. And I've been working with other people since. And I came to TUHU when it was created. I'm very proud to be a part of it. Everyone there has a voice, and we're a very skilled and talented group. And this document is something that I've been trying to get people to make literally for years, because nobody ever includes physically disabled people or our needs. People will ask for housing, but not ask that it's wheelchair accessible. And I don't think a lot of people are aware that, as I was saying, the city's version of wheelchair accessible is everything built to standing height, except for the bathroom. And they define an accessible unit by someone else not living there being able to enter. So even if the city were to adopt a lot of the recommendations, unless they enact the ones in here, we are still going to be homeless. And I waited over 20 years for a wheelchair accessible unit. I got housed into one where I can have my chair, but I've been there for 2.5 years, and I don't have a kitchen I can use. I don't have storage I can use. And I've been fighting them the whole time. I lived on the second floor of a house for 20 years, so I just couldn't go out for the first 15 years. I couldn't have a chair. And I've lost people to MAID, and it upsets me. I think that people do have the right to choose when they die for whatever the reasons they have, but not in this way, and not the eugenics being practiced by the government, because the people that I know that are no longer around, it's because after decades of living in enforced poverty, of eating maybe one thing every other day, of not living somewhere, where they're trapped because they can't get the devices they need. Like, it's literally hell. And it's like the pink tax. It's a disabled tax. Things are much more expensive for us. We have a lot more expenses. And all of this can be solved. I knew they had enough money solely from the money they put into the shelter system. When I went into the shelter system, into the hotel in November 2020, they were paying $6,600 per month for every one of us for 32 hotels. I was there 23 months, and they paid well over $150,000 for me, not including the increases every year. So just from that alone, I knew that they can afford to house every person here in Toronto, including the refugees. But then last night, I found out about the money that's literally just been sitting there. They have the money. It was given to them to build housing, to put into the shelter system. And they're closing down the shelters. People are dying. OEM is going into parks and taking everything. We have pictures and videos of them doing it on the coldest days of the year, and those people are dying. And if we had a livable income, we could have quality of life.
I was evicted from my apartment, which was $800 a month, 2-bedroom apartment, and washer and dryer in it. And I was only paying $800 a month, and they spent 4 years trying to evict me. And then I end up, they intimidated me on a weekly basis, banging at my door, and I end up leaving there and going couch hopping, and left all my belongings there for the moment. But I ended up winning the case for that, and couch hopping ended up being, I find that sometimes you're overdoing your welcome. So I just one day went for a walk, a long walk, and I end up in Allen Gardens. And somebody from Street Health came out, and they were out there, and they talked to me and gave me a tent. And from that time, which would have been September 15, 2021, I spent 2 years and a month and a day in the park. There was a lot of struggles, and we'd go through them taking wheelchairs and canes and accessible mobile scooters, different things from the park. And I've watched them take wheelchairs that belong to the hospital and throw them in their truck. So, and it really, I would get very angry with them. So, my first year in the tent, it was below 30 almost every weekend, and I would have to get out of there sometimes and go to my son's to stay. And then sometimes I just stayed in this tent, and I'd be pretty cold until I got under my blankets, and then I was toasty warm. Being in the encampment, I learned so much because you get to know about harm reduction. The nature out there was my big thing, was just being able to walk out of the tent and breathe. And I love the nature and the raccoons and squirrels, and I got to know a lot of people, and somebody would need something and I was able to give it to them. And if I couldn't, there'd be somebody else I could send them to that was also in a tent that might have what they need. We were a community, and I actually had a few communities over the time that I was in Allen Gardens. And we tried hard to be there when somebody was frustrated and try and de-escalate them. Sometimes people would be really stressed out, and you can hear them yelling. They're yelling at the government. And, not all of them, but some of them, that's what they're yelling at the government, because they feel let down. It's dehumanizing making people end up on the streets, and it's actually growing. The amount of people is growing all across Canada, not just Toronto. It's all across Canada. I've never seen anything like this before. It's heartbreaking because I've watched so many people die in the parks from my tents that were a part of our community. You know, they're gone forever, and that's not fair. They're human beings like everybody else. They have families, and if they don't have a blood family, they have us as family, but we don't get to see them. If something happened, we don't get to go in the hospital and see them or be there for them when something happens, and that's not right either. People should be able to community members should be able to go and be with that person if they need it.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.